Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Unplugged. My name is Jacob Puckett and I'm the host of the podcast. I want to say that I really appreciate you for tuning in to another episode as we wrap up part 2 of our series on Hugo's Heroes, remembering the hard work and dedication of the Blue Ridge line technicians and operations team that were faced with the destruction of that powerful and historic storm. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1 of the series, I encourage you to head back and give it a listen before hearing this episode. It really sets the stage for great conversations that we have in this segment. And without further ado, we'll dive right back into a great continued conversation with Director of Operations Robert Kent and Operations Managers Jeff Benfield and Mike Kincaid as they talk about the aftermath of the storm and some of the brighter moments involving some of our great cooperative members in a dark time.
Did we have SCADA then, Jeff? Do you remember?
Robert, I was not thinking that we did.
I didn't think we did either. So, if you think back,
I think like right early '90s, I was thinking. But
yeah,
like I said, I was a apprentice 3, and I had meters for a couple of years. I was in the second year of line work, so I was kind of wild-eyed right there. But I remember the I reckon the moment was when Bruce Drum sent me down there, backside of Bob King's there, and we looked that line out. And the first thing I saw was I called him, and when I was on the radio, we didn't have a cell phone, so I said we got a broke pole, and all of a sudden I turned the corner, and as far as I could see, there's broke poles, and I had this overwhelming, for a young lineman at the time, because that was how thin we were. We have 13 linemen. I think they sent every person out by themselves just to assess the damage. Remember that, Robert? First, we got regrouped, and I go back to Shot Arnie again. He always said, "Okay, guys, we got to regroup. Come in, regroup." And when we did, we all went out separate. And you had meter readers, apprentice linemen, all the way to crew leaders looking at different lines and writing down everything that was down, broke, whatever. And then time we got back in, we realized what we had. And then, of course, you started getting crews in here. And I don't remember how many crews we had, Robert, in here, but they were hard to get, of course, from North Carolina because of the storm, but they eventually came. And I'll never forget, me and Larry Wagner and Eric Laws was in a service truck. But we didn't have all buckets in either. A lot of this was done by climbing. You had very few buckets back in '89, and we'd worked there for a couple of weeks. And this group from Blue Ridge Mountain come in, and they jumped out there. They was fresh, and we had about 10 spans down feeding off Ike Starnes. And they said, "Guys, don't worry, we'll hoop these poles." And Larry Wagner looked at me and he said, "What did they say?" I said, they said it again. Larry said, "Well, let them do whatever they're going to do. So we're going to sit here and watch them for a minute." We decided to get some fresh people, but instead of climbing, they called it hoop the pole. So you really look glad to see the help come in when you've been out there 18 hours a day for 2 weeks or so. Always a good feeling.
You guys are talking about, other crews coming in from other states, which I know, it's not something that you want to do because it's a sign that you had a really bad storm. But how long was the recovery for this storm? What was the time frame to the point where you say you could breathe a sigh of relief and feel like, yeah, okay, we think we finally got it all back on, and I think we're good to go on this?
I remember approximately 14 days is what I remember to getting the people, the residents with the power back on that could get the power back on. There were a lot of services down. It seemed like after the 14-day period, of course, we were still working the storm, but you would go out and, there'd be a lot of services torn down and people's meter hubs torn off their houses and things like that we couldn't hook back up. But I think by and large, we had most of our circuits back up and going, and everybody that could receive power back on in 14 days in Caldwell. And I know up in the mountain districts, they ended up coming down to Lenoir and helping out with the restoration process down here in Lenoir. So that's what I remember. Jeff or Mike might tell you a different story, but I think that's pretty close.
For me, it was
they sent us to Staircase Mountain. And when they got back on that evening, and we went back up through Gary's Flat, going back to the mountain, that's when I knew it was over with then.
Yeah.
Because that's the last place we ended up at was on Staircase of Worship.
And that was like the staircase was then back on the mountain too, instead of on the road.
Yes, it was. I remember carrying my tools. It's a pretty good walk in there.
It was.
Because there was nothing on the road. And we had to carry our tools in to climb them. And some tall poles back in there on the side of that mountain in a place or two.
And me and Robert were talking that day when you sent this out, remember, like I said, after 14 days, you had what you could have on. Then, another week you had this on, some of the more services on. Then all of a sudden you're just we had Toyotas or service trucks or whatever, and you just had a load of lights. And, that's when you went back repairing the street lights. I mean, everybody was out there and you were nice service trucks in I think Robert said he's in a Toyota and going around repairing street lights. Because it takes a while to repair everything. You get the power back on, but then you got everything else where you got services down and street lights to repair.
Kind of switching around what we're talking about with the storm, I want to talk about more like personally. How are these storms for your families? Because I know you have to be away a lot, working during these storms. Do you worry during big storms like this, or do you, how do you balance the challenge of trying to get the power back on in a situation like that, with making sure your family's taken care of and making sure everybody's safe at home?
Well, for us, every year we have a little get together at Christmas, our district, and we have the wives there. And I always thank the wives because the wives have to be strong too. During Hugo, we was on Duke Power, so I couldn't get my own power back on. And my wife was at home with a 2.5-year-old baby with no power for a month, and we was away working. And you have limbs down, and some people had actually trees leaning on their house, and all that just kind of goes. You just have to lay it to the side. Babies at home, and they're without power. So without power, you're not getting baths because you got cold water, and there's a lot going on. So your mind's there, but you got to have your mind focused on your job. And
the families do give up a whole lot on the linemen. When the phone rings, they're up and going, and they miss birthdays and they miss Christmases and you name it. They probably missed it at some point in time, but it's just not the linemen either. When big storm comes through like this, it's everybody at Blue Ridge that's working. It's not just one little group; it's the whole thing.
Something I remember about Hugo, it rained so much after Hugo in the restoration process. A week after, we had torrential rains on like a Sunday, I remember, and you'd pulled on the hand line so much, or you'd worked with your hands so much, your hands had started cracking open. And so I remember putting Utter Bomb on my hands and getting tube socks put over my hands, both hands, because my hands had cracked open so bad and they were hurting so bad from the work and just the wet weather that you were dealing with throughout this storm. Storm was bad, but after the restoration process, we just torrential rains for a week after, and it was tough conditions.
You remember in September, it turned cold too.
Yeah.
It's only like for 2 or 3 days, but the rains would come in, and most of the time it's warm, but it turned cold there for a few days. I remember everybody couldn't believe it there in September, how it was cold, and that was a different scenario too.
And I know you guys were talking about how much damage was caused by the storm, and I imagine a lot of that was done by hand, especially in 1989. So does that just add a different element to it as well? When you're talking about that kind of workload and crews having to set poles by hand and things like that. What was that experience like then versus now?
For me, it's technology, but I think we've already talked about it a little bit. I think we maybe had 3 bucket trucks in Lenore at the time. I don't remember the exact, but I did get on one of the small buckets, but we had very few buckets like we do now. Now we have, numerous buckets. Also, I mentioned SCADA, and that's where we can control devices and monitor devices from the office. And we didn't have that in place that I remember at the time. So we really, like Jeff said, we had to go patrol the line. So that was a technology that is new to us. And then, if you think of 89, that's what, 32 years ago. And we have moved a tremendous amount of lines on the roads, or closer to the roads, whether it be 321 Highway Road Project, or maybe even Mike was mentioning Staircase Mountain. We've just moved a lot of lines on the roads and been more accessible. And that makes a huge difference during a storm like this, where you can pull up to the side of the road and set a pole with the truck versus having to gin a pole in on the side of the mountain. Like I remember at, Jeff, where were we? At Kirby Mountain.
That's back when the three-phase used to go back on the backside of the mountain across them rock bluffs and, and two, Robert, then with up there, like you said, hand digging, and now we have track machines.
Right.
And if the track machines gone, we still have track hose, so we can use both those to set poles with now, where used to you had to kind of just tie ropes together if you're 300 or 400 foot away to get it in there. Then you had to hand dig it and hand set it, and the equipment has helped as much as the technology. The technology, keeps you from running back and forth, where they can operate the breakers and stuff from the office, and the equipment, it relieves you a whole lot of your back. Your back feels better at the end of the day when you got a track machine versus snap diggers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, when we came to Caldwell, Jeff, to help down there, Bud Files was with us for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
His backhoe setting poles.
Yeah, Bud Paul, he's a member, Jacob, and he was a real asset to us. We have him and Mike Willis and some of them back in the day when we didn't have track hose. They had backhoes, and they'd come in and help haul poles and dig holes for us. And so members get involved too in the storms. You use their businesses. We have people on our system. We do the rural country, of course, and they have different equipment back then, and we've always helped them out, or they've helped us out. And then too, if you're in a place, a lot of times they'll let you borrow your 4-wheeler, where you ride a line out or haul material in. So, the members come in play too. They're wanting power on, and we have some really good members out there that say, my house is open, take what you need. So a lot of times we utilize that and borrow some 4-wheelers and different things to get in some of these poles.
That's awesome. That's something you don't think about very often, is thinking about how the members rally together during this. And that kind of just speaks to the whole cooperative nature, really. It's just different at a cooperative. It's different when you're a member of a cooperative, and we're all a team. We're all trying to help each other out. So that's an incredible testament and story to that storm. And I guess it kind of leads into my last question for you guys. What were your lessons learned from the storm? What would you bring to future storms because of that one storm? Did anything in your mind or your mindset or the way you work change because of that specific storm in Hurricane Hugo?
I reckon a lot. The lesson is, we kind of stay focused on planning when you see one come in. Like Robert said, Bob Moretz said at the end. Now we have different people watching the weather, and it's real good. We always try to stay prepared. Every day. Not a whole lot changes. You're just checking hand coils of wire, and this time of day right now, with the COVID, you've got to stay on top of it. Make sure you have materials, because materials are just not readily handy like they normally are. So right now we're trying to make sure we keep our warehouses full, because if you have a bad storm, you start ordering, well, there's not there. So just planning, probably.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, lessons learned from that storm is, it's important. Jacob, we take the linemen, we do our things and prepare, but also the hotels for the people coming in, the meals that are made. I think if I remember back, it's been a long time ago, I think I actually gained weight during Hugo because of all the food that was given to us by our members. I remember instance where, tobacco used to be a big crop in the Grace Chapel community, and, they were drying tobacco right at that time, and they had their dry kilns, and they depended on electricity to run the fans to dry the tobacco, and they were right in the middle of that, and this thing hit, and that's their livelihood. They work for that, and so they all got together and came up to Blue Ridge and met here, and so we decided to make an effort to go out and just get the tobacco barns back on. There was a lady that came down and gave us some fried apple pies she'd made on the wood stove, and I was putting the truck back up. We got the tobacco barn back on, and Vernon Green said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, we're going on the next." And he said, "No, we're not." He said, "We're getting this lady's power back on." And she was the one that gave us the fried apple pies on the wood stove. So I think just the coming together of the community of Blue Ridge as a whole, from the front office to the corporate office to everybody, had to come together. And so I think for me the lesson learned is look around within the company and and use everybody. Everybody wants to help. Everybody's got something they can do, and to be sure not to leave somebody out. But normally you just have to ask, and they're very willing to do whatever you ask them to do, whether it be deliver meals or whatever. So everybody wants to be a part of it, and everybody can be a part of it. And we've also talked about the community. So it's coming together when you have a major event for the good restoration.
As always, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Unplugged. I really encourage you, if you like this episode or any of our episodes, to hit the subscribe button so the podcast come directly to whatever device you're listening to us on immediately when the podcast episodes are released. And until next month, I'm your host, Jacob Puckett.